Richard Sennett, and he is going to give us a talk tonight about how things are in the world, what's happening to us, maybe with some focus on America and Britain and other countries of interest to Richard. This is a thrill for me because I don't get enough chance to hear Richard, and so I'm particularly delighted to have this opportunity to listen to him, you, and so. And we won't forget to have questions and answers afterwards. So do be thinking about those as Richard goes along. So without further ado, let me give you Richard Sennett.
Who's the other great?
I'm not telling.
That's a very elusive
Okay,
statement.
the other one is Saskia Sassen right there.
Well, this has been a wonderful conference and raised all sorts of issues. I'm not going to speak for an hour and a half because we've really we've traveled a lot of territory in the course of today. But I just do want to say a few, if that's possible for an academic, few words about how some of these economic issues look in another perspective. I want to say first that mass flourishing is a really evocative title, as is the theme, which is the promotion, your theme, which is the promotion of innovation and invention as the key to what makes economic life vibrant and stimulating for all an economy's actors, not just a privileged elite. That word flourishing is one that in my bailiwick, which is about work and the institutions of work, is a great puzzle. I mean, how do people flourish at work? What does it mean to flourish for instance, rather than be satisfied? You know, job satisfaction, in my view, is a kind of cheap form of flourishing, which is a much deeper phenomenon. I think that like much work, new work in economics, that what you're trying to do is give a kind of human resonance and depth to the understanding of economic life by including institutions, culture, even ethical considerations. And I must say that I think that's both a new and a very old pursuit, because this kind of holistic vision is how Aristotle thought about what the economy was about. And it's only today that we're recovering that. But for people like myself, who I do ethnographies of work and so on, though we quality of life studies of intense studies of workers, the intention is great, but the puzzle is also great. That is, what flourishing in that deeper sense really means. And you pose to us a kind of challenge, which is to think about what makes people flourish in work by thinking about the relationship between decay and your version of growth, which is not an economist's version of growth. But it's really set with the notion of decay and decline as the opposite to flourishing. And I'm sort of struggling with that. And I'm going to describe to you informally, I'm not going to read you a speech, how I've tried to understand this issue of flourishing through the interviewing I've done of people at work, which is a little removed from the issue of decay or decline. I think through the lens of everyday experience, there are other kinds of diagnostics that we want to use rather than whether people are. Can you hear me? Yeah. Oh, well, what can I do? How's this? I was saying that I think the notion of decline or flourishing is not really one that, in a sociological frame, we'd be entirely content with. We'd want to look at the issues you're getting at in a different way. And I'm going to talk to you about three things tonight. You emphasize very much innovation and imagination. And the sister to that is a question of skills. I mean, we can't have innovation without having the development of skills. And I want to talk to you a way in which I think that the neoliberal economy poses a challenge to the development of skills, and one which I think can be structurally changed. I secondly want to talk to you about an issue that I don't think is sufficiently theorized by economists, which is the divorce of power from legitimacy. And I say I don't think it's sufficiently theorized because this involves, for people who know this divorce, a legitimation of inequality through meritocracy, which is a very complicated phenomenon. And I'm going to try and explain it to you simply. And three, I want to talk about something that you write about very well, which is the idea of collaboration, or what Albert Hirschman called voice in an institution, and how that operates on the ground. A lot of what I'm going to report to you tonight is based on interviews not only that I've done, but that my team of harassed researchers at the London School of Economics, people who work from dawn to dusk as oppressed laborers, have done interviewing people in what's called the new economy, which is creative industries, high finance, and high tech. And we've focused on people who are not the stars of this new economy, but the people who are its ordinary workers, its back offices. I wouldn't call them the mass of the new economy, but they are certainly not the people who are its elite. They are the people who make it work every day. I want to start with the issue of how they experience skills. And to do that, may I unburden myself of a personal complaint. It was my harassed staff in 2007 which calculated something called the 10,000-hour rule, which, if you have read Malcolm Gladwell, he has borrowed, if I may put it that way, without attribution, calculations. Shall I say stolen or borrowed? Which is better? Stolen. Without calculations that we've made of how it is, what is the time required for somebody to become reasonably the master of a particular skill. They studied, well, I studied musicians. They studied people learning how to program. And they studied people learning how to perform various lab procedures. And the 10,000-hour rule, and you know it's a number. It's a number. It's a 9,960. It's a measure. It's a measure for, thank you. This is a correction from the other sociologist here. is a measure of the fact that skill development, which entails not learning only how to master something, but how to relate problem solving and problem finding, so that once you know how to do something, on the basis of that you can develop your skill, how to put different kinds of skills adjacent to each other, so that if one technique doesn't work, you have another to use. That this number represents about 3 or 4 years of work, 3 or 4 hours a day on developing a certain kind of expertise. It also holds for athletes, how long, and so on. The essential thing about this kind of skill is it's additive and it's long term. That is, that when we become skilled, whether we become innovative or not, but when we're able to actually be skilled, we've had to put in several years of work where we build up both the capacity to unite problem solving and problem finding, and to practice the principles of adjacency of skills, which is a fundamental issue in all skill development. If I can't do it this way, I'll try that. And it's the basis of technology transfer, and I keep you here all night if I talked about that. But the point about this is it's slow. It's additive and slow. And the people we were interviewing were the sorts of people who were mentioned, I think, by you this afternoon. They're living in a fast time economy where they don't have 3 or 4 years to develop this kind of matrice. They know instead something called serial experience of skills, which is you know how to do one thing. After a year or two, you may be moved in a corporation, which is itself flexible, short-term, responding to rapid changes in the market, and you're starting over again, learning something else. The finding that we had about this is there's not enough time for skill to bed in as tacit knowledge, so that you feel comfortable about what you know, that it's tacitly available to you in a new situation. Serial skills mean that you're a lot of times faking it, but that you're having to relearn in a new situation skills without being the master of what you've learned before. In other words, you don't in the course of time build up a repertoire of being a skilled person. And I would say this is the most, in terms of flexible capitalism today, this is, from the point of view of looking at how people think about their skills, this, I would say, is the way in which they don't feel they're flourishing in this new economy. They're not flourishing because they don't have the time to build skill to the point where it's something tacitly they can command, and command many skills in dealing with the problem. So that's, I see, one issue. It's a real issue about the time of flexible capitalism. And the problem, policy problem, is how to slow down time in a business or in any institution so that people can develop skills of that sort. In Britain, where Saskia and I live, this is the greatest challenge to the National Health Service, for instance, which has been reformed and reformed and reformed in a model of sort of flexible capitalism applied to the public sector. Each time it's reformed, people do new things. They have to relearn. A nurse has to relearn how to nurse under new situations. People who are working as lab technicians who develop, for instance, a real capacity as urologists are suddenly working in brain with brain scan machinery. And this is, as you know, something that a lot of businesses are struggling with as well. The good firms, like McDonald's, whose food is inedible, but whose corporate structure in some way is admirable, it's deeply inedible, but have thought out the notion of skill building over long periods of time. Corporations, I'm going to be talking about it later, but a nameless corporation in the northwest corner of the United States has not given its employees the chance they're constantly being shifted to new tasks. And internal markets do that. If you're a loser in an internal market, you get shifted to something else in the business, which this nameless corporation does. So in a way, fast time is de-skilling. And I think this is an issue that when we think about flourishing, we have to take on board. Second, I'd like to say something about power divorced from legitimacy. And to make this concrete to you, I want to talk about the phenomenon of the incompetent boss. This is a phenomenon we've studied in many circumstances. What if the person who has power over you is perceived by you to be incompetent? What are the consequences? I'm going to give you an example from a study I was telling someone here about today that we did of people in the back offices of Lehman, just to make this clear to you. This gives me such pleasure to tell you this story. But it's merely an illustrative incident. As you know, a lot of the work of creating the algorithms in firms like Lehman was turned over to physicists, to people who really know the math. And we interviewed 5 of these physicists at great length, and we're still following what's happened to them since that fatal, it's actually the anniversary of today, isn't it, of Lehman, today. Yesterday. Wow. And they described the following story, which will tell you what the incompetent boss phenomenon is like. They were struggling to create a set of algorithms for a new financial product which was really a whiz. And they worked on this for months, and finally they had a presentation to their bosses, who were making a multiple of about 10 times what their own salaries were, but who were not physicists. They make this presentation, they said to me, "We made it so clear, even you, Richard, would have understood it." They'd really worked on this. They finish the presentation, and the response from one of the bosses is to smile and say, "Whatever." That's a way of losing legitimacy. That is, that the boss neither cares nor understands. And what we've been finding is that there are many situations in which technical workers, people you and I celebrate, feel that in the structure of this new capitalism, that they're ruled by people who are not competent to judge them. Which is to say, if I put this formally, that meritocracy has broken down. You can understand some of what this problem is by thinking about a situation which the sociologist in the military, Morris Janowitz, once looked at, which is what happens when men in battle no longer think that their commanding officers know what they're doing. And Janowitz said, it's very simple. They shoot them in the back. You know? That's not something that can happen in the civilian realm. Not yet. But the point about this is we found in this sector, it's quite widespread, a feeling that particularly in finance, but also in the culture industries, I'll give an example of this, that the people who run advertising agencies are blind. We heard this over and over again. They don't know what a good advertisement looks like. And they certainly don't understand how to make one online. So what you have is a kind of breakdown of the notion of meritocratic inequality. And in my own view, this explains why the issue of inequality in these new sectors, this new capitalism, cuts so hard. Inequality is something people can live with if they think it has a legitimate foundation. But if inequality is founded on incompetence, it's impossible, it hurts much more. And that was the situation which we found over and over again. There have been a lot of, we don't do survey attitude studies, but people who do them have found, for instance, in this nameless corporation in the Northeast Corridor, that this accounts for 35 to 40% of the reasons that people leave this corporation. That is, that they're working for bosses who, as one of them put it, are fakes, making more money they don't deserve. And it is a profound stimulator, Ned, of grassroots entrepreneurship, which is not a positive thing, but it's the notion that you're getting away from a situation which is illegitimate and humiliating. I'd like to say finally something about collaboration. I'm sure all of us have read Albert Hirschman's Exit, Loyalty, and Voice. It has, in this new economy, has a very particular configuration, which is that voice is seen, in the words of Gideon Kunda, who's a great analyst of this, as a kind of phony teamwork. That is, everybody in these corporations has to make a show of being cooperative. But it's only a show. As he remarked, my wonderful student, as he remarked, you smile but you watch your back. And the notion that there's genuine kind of cooperation, or indeed even something where your voice is heard and respected, is disbelieved. The result of that is a familiar corporate boogaboo, which is silos, which is, if you believe that collaboration and teamwork is a sham, in these businesses, the only thing you can do is hoard knowledge to protect yourself. You worry that somebody else will steal it, smiling, like Mr. Gladwell. But you see the serious point of this. We're dealing with a kind of economy in which the knowledge walks in and out of the door every day. And if there isn't the trust that enables people to share what they do, your only capital lies, defensible capital, human capital, lies in creating silos. What our team found, and this was a study of hospital workers in Boston, very skilled. This is not a study I did, but one of my students did, was that the result of this kind of They were on an NSF grant. It was a huge group, nearly 85 people. Is that you had a kind of institutional stagnation because the only protection was not to tell other people, really tell other people what you were doing, because they might steal it from you. So what I'm suggesting to you is that, and I guess I address these concluding remarks to you, is that if you look at the problem you're interested in, which is flourishing, which is well-being, which is something deeper than having a nice time at work, being able to play ping pong in the Googleplex or something like that, but where you really feel that you're building up your skills, that you have meaningful social relationships with your peers, and that you experience legitimate power. These three things I'm talking about. That those, they're not going to be measured by national comparisons. They require thinking about how a firm is organized, about its institutional structure as people experience it every day. And the nature of that structure, slow, something in which those with power have knowledge, and in which people are not put at risk for exposing themselves, are sociological constructs which, in my view, create the capacity of people to flourish in institutions, particularly in these institutions of the new economy. So I just want to say in closing, I'm no economist, as my wife will tell you, but I found the idea of what you were talking about, which is an idea which is really enlightenment in its character, that there's something like progress, that there is something about innovation which takes us forward, makes us modern. To me, that setting I would reframe as a question not about modernity or tradition, but about viable or unviable institutions. A very old-fashioned kind of business can be either this way or not, or a very new business can be either this way or not. The reason I got interested in the new economy was precisely by a kind of intuition, when I've been doing this work for a long time, that somehow the idea of advance, of forward-looking, of the new, hid an enormous number of structural problems about justice, cooperation, and legitimacy. So, thank you very much. That's what
yeah, sure.
Are thinking questions? If somebody brings a glass of red wine.
I didn't think I was going to be involved in this dinner speech. I thought Richard would probably give us a tour of America, Britain, and Europe, and I hadn't really got very far at imagining not the pleasure spots. I mean, you know, the workplace. I hadn't imagined that I would be a figure in this. This is not about me, but I have to explain something. I don't think you've read my book. I complain about the corruption and the decadence that has set in what I guess we may call modern capitalism, beginning in the 1970s. And I emphasize the infighting in corporations, the insecurity, and all that. So what you imagine to be a profound difference between me and you, I don't think is really there. But on the other hand, and now I'm going to, and then after this I will shut up. I do think that that you are a little overly dark, shall we say? I mean, I know something about this country, having been born in 1933 in Chicago. I know something about entrepreneurial farmers, entrepreneurial merchants in manufacturing. I come from that sort of background. And I had a sense from an early age of people's joy in their life in business. And thanks to that, I was able to divorce myself a little bit from standard economics, which never heard of such a thing. But we're not going to talk, I guess, about the 19th century tonight and the first half of the 20th. But I just wanted to make that clear that my book is a somewhat nostalgic appeal to getting back to the time when people were really engaged in the workplace and had a great time, and large numbers of people were exploring and experimenting and voyaging into the unknown and loving it, despite the concomitant speculative swings and the insecurities of it all.
Well, I think where we differ is that for you, flourishing, I think that where we differ is that for you, flourishing has a very strong, innovative, and I would say entrepreneurial cast. And for me, I don't think that innovative, it's just a difference in interpreting the same material. But for me, what causes people to flourish is not that they're entrepreneurial or innovative. I think sometimes people flourish because they can be just ordinary Joes and Josephines in a bureaucracy, but that the bureaucracy is well run, that the hospital is well run,
And I don't think so, because I think you need to have the jolt of new experience, shocks, change, challenge. For me, that's bedrock. That's fundamental.
Yeah, we disagree. We disagree. That's why you're an economist and I'm a sociologist. Questions?
Richard?
How can you all hear if we do this?
You hearing okay? I have a hearing aid or two I could lend you if they...
You invoke two, in addition to Ned, you invoke two proper nouns in your talk, Lehman and Hirschman.
Yeah.
Now, with respect to the first, and the notion that there's something fundamentally new about silos and protecting your turf, I never forget being introduced to Lehman Brothers in 1971, and I was told that every partner at the end of the day locked his, there were only male partners, locked his desk so that his partners would not find out who his clients were. Not that much new. But second, Hirschman, and taking a little bit further from Exit Voice and Loyalty, Hirschman's resistance to the notion of the inevitability of the tragedy of the common.
Right.
His celebration of a kind of flourishing, of collective action, whether it's barn raising or all-nighters writing code together, is something that I think is something I'd love to hear you reflect upon. The anti-tragedy of the commons.
Yes, well, I mean, that's in him. And it's, I mean, the thing about, we knew him well until the end of his life. I mean, I think about, the thing about Hirschman was that what really moved him was the notion that you could have development outside the terms of normal economic measures of growth. And what that meant was never clear to him. But I know that, you know, if you cited to him GDP rates, you know, increases in them, he said that's irrelevant to whether people are integrated in the society, whether they feel that they have a voice with larger and larger institutions. The whole notion of this nested institution thing in Hirschman comes out of the notion that exit fundamentally is a drastic strategy which can be avoided by voice. So, which is why Albert was not a radical economist in the sense of the people you studied. He believed voice was always possible, and the question was the hierarchies, like a Matushka doll. And so it's, I mean, his quarrel was that he thought the tragedy of the commons was a kind of microeconomic view of what essentially was a macroeconomic problem at the scale of development, not at the scale of GDP growth, which you refer to in your book as well. But GDP growth is not a very good way.
Thank you. Thank you.
Did you think I gave you a hard time? No.
No. Not too hard. No, a little bit.
No.
Can I ask a short question? Is it true that you talk about the joy of work in the old times, and that might have been fun for entrepreneurs and people starting firms, but the most people who worked from 1900 to the First World War to the Second World War, a routine work in dirty factories, they look more like Chaplin in modern times.
Okay. Also, I got the point. I got it. Don't sit down, Richard. You're a principal here. You're the speaker, for God's sakes. Come on. Let me off the hook here.
I'm just sitting for a moment.
Well, I totally reject that. I think that there are offices, there are bands of people, they have the camaraderie, they have their involvement in their work, they take pleasure in solving problems. I've had a little experience in business offices.
The employees didn't solve problems. They followed orders.
I even had an experience in what would seem to be a very unfavorable office conditions. I somehow or other won an award won a place as one of two people to kind of intern at the Metropolitan Life Insurance Company as an actuary. I don't know how I won this competition. It's ridiculous. But anyway, I'm not that good at math. But anyway, so there I was, and I remember that after I went through personnel, I entered into this room, and there were around 200 people with their Monroe calculators working on problems about essentially what prices to charge for various kinds of policies, taking account of actuarial experience and all that. And I was impressed that summer at the good spirit, at the involvement. They would go to one another to seek help with solving their problem. They never went to me. I couldn't solve any of their problems. But this was a very favorable experience. And this is unfavorable conditions. There's a whole bunch of them. It's like an army of them. But they formed their friendships. They formed their alliances. They worked together, and they had fun. They were involved in it. Their pride was in doing it right, doing it well. I don't know where this dark view comes from. Now I know you've done your homework and you've done this significant and interesting field work. Is that the word?
Field work.
Yeah, field work. And you've encountered a lot of distress by people, and a lot of unhappiness. But maybe that's because a lot of ugly things have happened to the once modern economy, beginning in the 1970s. So I'm quite prepared to believe your evidence, but don't throw out the baby with the bathwater and say there's no such thing as flourishing and there never was.
No, I don't say that. No, I don't say that. But I'd like to make a comment about this.
Okay.
Because, do I...
Yeah, you got the mic.
Okay. I mean, I think one thing you're pointing to is something that in studies of work we deal with a lot, which is the divide between informal and formal relations in the workplace. There are lots of Fordist firms which had a rather lively informal character, mutual support, and so on. There are other kinds of Fordist firms, to take that as an extreme, which are exactly what you're talking about. And the question, the social question of this is, what are the conditions under which this informal overlay on this formal rigidity can arise? I've been studying for about 20 years, as you know if you read my books, a factory in a bakery in Boston.
Still exists? 20 years?
Still exists. It's a family firm. There's still oppressed Greeks working in this factory and so on. And it's a factory that about 20 years ago, just when I began studying it, converted from craft bakery to industrial production. And the informal networks you're talking about have waxed and waned. They've waned now, and I don't think this is accidental, because they had a set of consultants come in and do efficiency studies. And the consultants found that people were spending too much time going to the bathroom, that there was a coffee machine in an industrial bakery. It's really grueling work, because this factory is automated. But bread does not obey, it's not like, it has a life of its own. People are under a lot of pressure. There's an immense amount of spoilage. The consultants said, these people are spending too much time relieving stress. That's indulgent. So, no coffee machine, timed breaks to the bathroom, and strictly, this is McKinsey, and strictly 55 minutes lunch breaks. And the result is that the employees you know, the productivity is going down, they're becoming very inattentive to this automated machinery and so on. So what I'd say about what you found was that although it may have been, you know, very highly regimented labor, that what was making it, what I wouldn't use the word flourish, but what made it a place where people felt that there was something going on that was engaged was this informal level. And what we need to do, I can't say for economics, but one of the sort of big issues now in the sociology of work is trying to measure these informal conditions.
Yeah.
You know? Yeah. So anyhow, I think that's the dimension, the structural dimension of this. Even Henry Ford himself, to give him a fair shake, the assembly line was completely absolute, but there was a little flexibility in who was on the line at any given time. Whereas
Good to
in
hear.
Chevrolet, which was much more, the GM, much more under the influence of Taylorite things. There was less flexibility in the informal dimension of work, and the productivity was much less in the 20s than Ford.
Yeah.
So, you know, it's a complex phenomenon. But I would insist on the informal element of this from a social point of view, in whether people, let's say, whether not flourish, but that they're engaged and that the work doesn't seem, soulless to them. Yeah.
Amar?
So I do field work too, and I'm going to rise a little bit to Ned's defense, not entirely, to a large degree. So I have interviewed a few hundred entrepreneurs in the United States. I've interviewed slightly less than that in India, and there is no question in my mind that the entrepreneurs in the United States, even after the 1970s, have the mindset and the joy and the exhilaration that Ned describes. There is also no question in my mind that the entrepreneurs I interviewed in India do not have that they find it a grinding, awful business which involves bribing government officials, etc. I also found a few exceptions in India. One of them was I don't know how many of you are familiar with these Udupi restaurants. Yeah, fast food restaurants, and people are just amazingly efficient there. And I asked one of the owners, I said, why are these people working with such ferociousness practically? And the answer was, who knows whether it was true or not, the answer was because each of them sees himself as one day being an owner of his place. And I think part of what Ned may be describing is that a very large proportion of Americans, whether they are actually entrepreneurs or not, project themselves one day to being in that position and therefore are more willing to take pride in things or take joy in things that are otherwise like mundane and mindless. That makes sense. So that was my general observation.
They're with the program.
They're with the program. Now, that was rising to Ned's defense. Now, I want to ask you a question, which was, since you said Gladwell deprived you of authorship of the list, yeah, I may be attributing authorship, which my memory is not that good. But I vaguely recall that you had provided a wonderful definition of craftsmanship at one point, where you said craftsmanship, maybe it was somebody else, but if it was you, nobody else. If it was you, you talked about craftsmanship as being work where there is risk in the process of the act itself.
That's not me. Doing work for its own sake.
But let's say it had been.
That definition of thievery, that a craftsman, I mean, a potter is in the process of making that pot, something may go wrong, and so forth. And that risk, the flip side of it is that it provides power, as opposed to the simple siloized knowledge of the Lehman partner and that knowledge sort of the idea that things could work or not work depending on the quality of the craftsmanship, even if there's a boss, and even if the boss is stupid, and bosses I think have been stupid since time immemorial, evened out. And perhaps what you're observing is that we have developed technologies that have taken away the risk of performance, thereby shifted the power balance between the craftsman and
That's a really interesting idea. That's a very interesting idea.
Yeah.
And why do you think that happens?
because it's more economically efficient. Because you could. I mean, today, for instance, you can try out things with 3D printing and so on and so forth. And if something, the cost of spoilage today is much less than what, except in your bread factory. So your bread factory remains a place.
But they're much lower.
Right, but it's still that.
So Amar, I once heard, not very long ago, the head of a major software development program say that the thing about foolproof software management systems, they always make greater fools.
Right.
Yeah. That automating the process is still the difference between an outstanding programmer and a run-of-the-mill programmer is a decimal order of magnitude in productivity, with 50 years of technology behind it.
Is there another question from the floor? Mr. Montgomery, you had your hand up from the beginning.
I'd like to just ask about this idea that bosses are incompetent. I mean, you picked an example of a particularly obviously incompetent boss in the sense of Lehman. But is it not inevitable that the boss is not going to have, potentially the line manager could have the respect because they're recently promoted, they have those skills.
Yes.
But once they get beyond being the line manager, once they move to a higher level, their skill is in management. Inevitably, they're not going to be up to date. I mean, they might have been, 300 years ago when skills didn't really change very much, that would be fine. But any time now when skills modify and change over time so rapidly, it's impossible for the managers of any large company to have to be in touch with detailed skill levels.
Right. I mean, this is a real structural issue, and the issue is something like this. If somebody is really good at doing something, the reward is that they get to supervise other people doing it. And in time, they lose what they used to know. The complaint that I heard from the layman people, we interviewed quite a few of them, is that their bosses had never, and they use this word, paid their dues. They'd never done any programming. They didn't understand physics to begin with, which is a different kind of problem.
Was this the line managers? Or were they presenting to the board?
They were presenting to vice presidents down, say, 4 levels from the top.
So they're going 7 levels above their own.
That's right.
And is the problem really that this is a case of an organisation that's very broad, that those people were probably experienced bankers but knew nothing about physics or technology?
Exactly. And they were very good, they were experienced bankers in the sense that they were fantastic networkers. As you know, this was one of Lehman's, you know this, you can tell us all of these stories. But I think what you highlighted is something that's an important structural contradiction in all skill work. If somebody is rewarded for being good at a job by giving a supervisory job, you have built in a kind of structural contradiction. And in time, they no longer, they haven't paid, they haven't, they lose contact with doing the things they're supervising other people to do. It's in the NHS a huge problem with head nurses, for instance.
I suppose what I'm getting at isn't this just kind of so what? Is the
Yes,
response?
yes. That is a so what.
Such is life, and what else are we supposed to do?
Yeah, that's right. But the other side of it, of never having had the experience, of never been upwardly mobile, but coming in at a higher level, is where you get this kind. I think that's where you get much more the sense of illegitimacy.
This is where you get people in one industry recruiting managers from another.
Exactly. Yeah.
Mark Bernard?
Richard, I wonder if you looked at the military and how they, particularly the U.S. military. I spent an afternoon last week with Stanley McChrystal, formal, general, and we were talking about how he had to change his view of management in the way he organized his force, and how the military had to restructure. For example, special forces, if you're a sergeant or a lieutenant in special forces, you never go up a pay grade. You might stay for 20 years.
Right.
And you get better and better at it, and that's respected in the special forces.
Right.
And likewise, he sort of tried to restructure the way the information exchange channels. Anyway, I just wondered, I don't know the military, I'm not a military person, but I was impressed by how he did not have the luxury, or they did not have the luxury of keeping an old framework that wasn't adapting to the battlefield conditions. They had to change, and they did change in ways that, at least at the management level, seemed to work. I'm not talking about the effectiveness of what they did, but seemed to work pretty well in terms of morale.
That's really interesting. I mean, I make one comment about this, which is a theoretical comment, but which bears this out. You know that Weber, when he began studying work organizations, said that the model for effective work organizations was the military. And that one of the ways in which capitalism developed a kind of contradiction in the course of its development, very far, it's horrific, but it takes him far from Marx, is the notion that civil work began to be conceived in ways different from war work. And for Weber, the idea was that the military was the most, because it was literally life and death, was the most effectively adaptive form of bureaucracy we know. Whereas capitalism, the more peaceful it becomes, the less adaptive it is. So, I mean, it's still something that people have, they don't like to think about this, but this is a very Weberian proposition. So the nicer capitalism becomes, the less adaptive it is.
The less serious it is.
It's a terrible idea, but maybe a realistic one.
I'm going to have to call this to a close, but before we say goodbye, I want to thank Phil Coldiron, the administrative manager of the center, for heroic work in making this happen. I fled to China myself, but Phil seemed to do pretty well. And I want to thank also my assistant, Jeff Nagy, who filled in for me 100 times. And I want to thank all of you for coming today and taking part in this, what I think we all agree was a really very interesting conference. Good night.